and I'm anxiously looking forward to their comments and to Alvaro for facilitating the whole thing. I'll give a little bit of overview on the book. First, I'll tell you what it is not, because a lot of people do a quick browsing and sort of think it is one of the books, it's something like they've already known about. The book is not about Indian, it is not a treatise on Indian systems. So you're not going to find a thorough analysis of all the different darshanas or all the different periods or all the different philosophers. It is not a kind of survey of Indian thought. At the same time, it is not a post-colonial critique of the West. Post-colonial critique suffers from the use of Western thought to criticize the West, typically Marxism or postmodernism or subaltern studies and things of that sort. This is not a proper Purva Paksha, our dharmic view of the West, because it's more like a West self-critique. So what I've tried to do is, having lived in the West for 40 years, and having been rooted in this tradition and never forgotten that, I have an opportunity to have one drishti look at the other. So this is a manthan between two civilizations. That's why the cover of the book is a Samudra Manthan. If you see the picture on the cover of the book, that's what it is. Now, if I want to find out, if I want to do an inquiry, which I've been doing for 15 years, on how would the Dharma see the West, the Dharmic civilization as I call it. Typically, it's the other way around. The West sends anthropologists and social scientists and travelers to see India, map India onto their terms. This has been going on for a few hundred years. And this mapping of India onto Western terms has become very powerful and has become so, also installed in the minds of Indians, especially those who are English-speaking or those who are Westernized, the people in Delhi, the people who have power, the people who make decisions, allocate resources, your budgets, things like that. So, Western universalism, by that term I mean, West's own history, West's own particular history that it went through, and then the Western thought that emerged based on this history, which is remarkable, has many great things in it, and was able to solve many Western problems, but not necessarily universalizable in the sense that other people did not have those situations, did not have those problems, and to just blindly apply Western universalism is a bad idea, but it has been done, and it still sort of prevails. So given the West's history and West's power, Western universalism means the Western ideas, Western paradigms becoming seen as universal. And that happened due to power, not because of some merit or something, but because of colonialism and the spread of Western ideas through humanities especially. So the way we demark periods in history, the way we have social science theories and categories, the way some of the Sanskrit words are translated are all because of Western universalism. It might surprise some of you that critical editions, the critical editions that are going on in the West are often using translations and assumptions that might not be particularly friendly to our tradition. So, for instance, the Mahabharata critical edition has translated Kshatriya as feudal lord. So there is an assumption of a feudal system. Shudra as slave. So it's a feudal system. Yeah, that's the assumption. So the way European history and European categories are sort of the grid on which others are being mapped. Devas are gods, and now this translation of Devas as gods then allows people to look at the whole history of polytheism, Roman Greek polytheism, and sort of superimpose that on Hinduism. And the idea of Atman translated as soul is troubling because soul doesn't reincarnate, soul doesn't exist in animals or plants. So the whole theology of soul gets sort of brought in, and we have to sort of argue against, like swimming upstream here, argue against the word which already has so much built into it. Bhakti has been often translated as Holy Spirit. Some of you who might see my video, I had a 1.5-hour discussion debate with Mark Tully in Delhi. That video is available on the website of this book. And we discuss all these things. So, I explain why this translation of Shakti as Holy Spirit, which is becoming very popular, is very problematic actually. So the problem is that somewhere along the way, our thinkers, scholars, traditional thinkers, stopped doing Purva Paksha. We're supposed to do Purva Paksha of the other. This happened in the classical period. I don't have to remind you of it. But somehow there wasn't that Purva Paksha done on Western thought. There wasn't an attempt to say, okay, let's do our, understanding of Hegel, let's translate Hegel into Sanskrit and let's take it to Banaras and teach it to our Pandits and let's have them give a response to it, or Kant, or any great European thinker, or John Stuart Mill, or Max Weber, or whatever. There just wasn't that passion to see the other. Somehow the inward looking became emphasized to the extent of ignoring the global discourse. So the global discourse has become controlled and dominated by Western universalism. And post-colonial scholars did a disservice by critiquing this Western universalism using West's own categories. They generally are not interested or loyal or very sympathetic to classical Indian thought, often criticizing it as abusive. So that is hardly the Siddhanta they would use. So there hasn't been, this is a problem. I have gone around to traditional mattas, I've gone around to modern organizations like Ramakrishna Mission and many others. And by and large, I find consensus among the thinkers that this is in fact the case, that we do not have a qualified person who can give a very good discourse on Western enlightenment or even Judaic Christianity. It's very superficial, simplistic, dismissive. And dismissive is not a smart thing to do. One has to take it seriously because after all, the Western civilization has some very smart people and they have done a lot of profound thinking. So it would be a good idea for us to understand what they are saying in a serious way and then be able to explain what's different from our point of view. So the students today in India are surrounded by Western aesthetics. Western aesthetics is the way to upward mobility, Western thought, Western values, and also getting a stamp of authenticity and certification from Western agencies, conferences, journals, universities, publications. This is one area of concern, and the subtitle of this book is An Indian Challenge to Western Universalism. So my methodology of challenge requires, first I have to find where am I standing in what I call Dharma tradition. Where am I standing? It's not easy to find a place to stand within the Dharma tradition, because if you take a Advaitin stand, then the Vishishta Advaitins and Advaitins will say, well, that doesn't represent me. If you take a Sri Aurobindo stand, then ISKCON and Vaishnavites will say that is not my Dharma. So you have to, it almost seem like you first have to solve one problem in order to start the other analysis. And the problem of trying to find a consensus or a common ground is something I do not want to try, because that has been attempted by people for centuries, people are much more qualified than me, and I did not want to start that project. So when some people say, well, what is the Dharma as you see it? What is your definition of Dharma, civilization, before you can even address this issue? They are expecting that I have analyzed all the traditions and written an overview and then said, okay, this is the essence. I did not do it that way. I used a very different method. I used a method by finding out what is the contrast with the West. And what is the contrast with the West which we all share? And if I can define a few differences with the West, and hence the term being different, if I can find a few differences with the West, which one of the Dharma traditions, or almost every one of the Dharma traditions has, then that itself forms a sort of common ground. It's a different approach. So for example, I'll give you an example. If you take the Nicene Creed as the definition of Christianity, which is probably the closest thing to a definition of Christianity, in the Nicene Creed, it starts with original sin, and then there is virgin birth, and then there is crucifixion and redemption, and all. These are very historical events. Now, if you contrast the idea of, if you take the idea of karma and reincarnation, and try to see one can fit into the other, it's easy to show that there is a contradiction. If you start with karma and reincarnation, you cannot make the idea of original sin and the subsequent events work. And good Christian theologians will not accept a karma reincarnation reinterpretation, although it is on the fringes of Christianity being talked about, but never in the mainstream. On the other hand, if you go the other way, and you take the Nicene Creed as your starting point, then the whole idea of many births and karma and all that doesn't seem to fit very well. So if you have found a difference there, this is a difference which all the different Dharma traditions that I came across will share. They have no problem saying that this particular definition of Nicene Creed we can't accept. It will not fit in with our karma and reincarnation. So that becomes a common point. Without having to, so the common point of karma and reincarnation is a very important common point, because we may take it for granted that it is just a normal thing. We don't even make a big deal out of it. But the fact that it is not acceptable in the Abrahamic traditions actually makes it quite distinct and quite an important point. So this process of manthan required two manthans to go on. One is the external, one is the internal. So the external manthan is to go with people in the West and have these debates for many, many years and propose responses, see what they think about these responses. Because often when you say here is a difference, they will say, no, it's not true because we can also accept it. But then when you really go deeper into it, it is not acceptable. It is acceptable on a surface level, but it is not acceptable very deeply. Then the other manthan is internally among the people of various thinkers of our own civilization, to try and see whether they'll accept whatever difference you have come up with, whether they'll accept that is a relevant difference from their point of view also. So I had to go, that's why I come to India about 4 times a year to do these manthans here. And while I'm in the US, I'm doing my similar debates and discussions with people over there. So this lack of such a process has led to a number of our gurus going around and talking about presenting they are the closest thing to an ambassador of our civilization, because they're at least going to the media, the mass market, and they have billions of followers everywhere. But they're also very confused. So they have translated some of the, what I call non-translatables of Sanskrit, rather than keeping them as they are. And they have also digested or dissolved the distinctiveness of Dharma into a sort of a Western universal. Just to make it easier for Westerners to accept it, they have diluted things in order to make them easier to accept it. And so you can get quick followers, you can get millions of people very quickly behind you, but then it is not going to be sustainable long term. For instance, J. Krishnamurti was a big shot once upon a time. He was on the cover of Time magazine and one of the great thinkers of India on the world stage. And there were millions of Westerners, but you don't hear his name now. And Maharishi Mahesh Yogi had all kinds of big stars, running behind him. And now that he's gone, his whole organization is sort of also on the way down. So this inability to sustain beyond the charisma of the founder is a very common thing I found. And I'm also doing another volume on the Guru movements, what happened to them. From the very early Gurus that went, the Ramakrishna mission, the the self-realization fellowship and all the modern gurus recent times, what happened to them. And the common pattern is that those who adopt a strategy of very quickly getting a lot of followers with very low standards and very little expectation and demands being placed on these people can of course become very successful, but the success is not is short-lived. It doesn't last a long time because in the process they diluted their own tradition in a very substantial way. So the idea of the book is to develop differences from the Dharma point of view, the differences with the West that are non-negotiable. Differences, not differences that are easily reconciled. So we walk barefoot, it's not a big problem, anybody can do that, or we do mala, they can also do that. We wear, saints wear saffron, well, they can also wear saffron. These are not irreconcilable differences. They do not violate the underlying DNA of the West. They're not digestible into the West. So I'm not interested in such differences because they are very superficial, symbolic. Symbolism can always be adapted. Symbols can be given new meaning. So such a pop culture is not the level of thinking I'm doing. I want to identify differences which are irreconcilable. I want to really understand what is it about our civilization that they're not willing to accept. Because this is a question that is generally not asked. People generally want to look for things that are same. It's more interesting to say we're all the same. But I'm asking the question, how are we different? So it's a radically different project from the popular project. Now, having explained what is Western universalism and why I'm interested in this whole idea of being different, I want to quickly go through some of the points made in the book. There is a concept introduced in the book called digestion. Digestion of one civilization into another. And by digestion, I mean, a tiger eats a deer or a goat, and the animal that has been eaten ceases to exist. It no longer exists anymore. Its DNA is broken down into raw material and reconstituted into the tiger's DNA. So the tiger becomes a stronger tiger, but the prey that it has eaten, the food it has eaten, no longer exists as its own separate self. This has happened to civilizations. The so-called pagans got digested into Christianity, so their Christmas tree and the mother child and Easter are all part of Christianity, but the pagans disappeared. The Native Americans got digested. A lot of culture of the Native Americans became part of American culture, but the Native Americans disappeared. And these disappeared civilizations live in museums. They live in museums. And so you could go to a museum and say what a grand civilization it was, how exotic it was. And maybe on 4th of July, some Native Americans abroad, they put on their dress and they dance and everybody feels very happy. But that is a problem for me. Civilization becoming digested is a problem for me. The cross-civilizational appropriation and learning is a good thing, but it needs to be done in a way that does not harm the source civilization. You have to nurture the roots, you have to keep nurturing the roots. And my concern is that we are being digested into the West, which means that a whole lot of things from the Indian civilization are being borrowed and taken and reformulated and converted into Western thought, Western history. And I'm doing a whole volume on the history of Indology over the last couple hundred years, European Indology, and how the result of this Indology was a huge awakening it was a huge input into the Enlightenment movement about linguistics, concerning philosophy, concerning ideas of history, concerning comparative religion. A lot of things happened in the West as a result of the study of Indology. And there was a time when Sanskrit became very common in almost every major European university, from 1800 to 1850. There was a big wave of Sanskrit. But then after this digestion was over, after they had taken what was considered useful and digestible, then the whole enterprise was downsized. So there's a rise of Sanskrit and then a fall of Sanskrit after it has been digested. So during the digestive period, of course, there's a lot of praise, a lot of romance, a lot of wow, what a great thing. But once Once all of these great ideas have been mapped to Western pioneers, Western originators, and made it part of the Western history, the march of civilization, then the source that can be abandoned. Then the source is no longer tree. It's like you harvesting the fruit from the tree, and you don't have the vision that we need to look after the roots because it will give us more fruit next year. So you just let the roots atrophy or use them in their dead. This sort of a thing has happened, and so my conclusion in this book is that we are being digested unless we are being different. We are being digested unless we are being different, which means if we are the same, where we are not clear about how we are different, and we have sort of diluted our distinctiveness into a Western universalism paradigm, there we are being digested. And the antidote to being digested is being different. So that is the reason for this project. The book, what I just told you, is sort of not what the book is mostly about, but the preface to explain why the book was written. Inside the book are 4 major differences that I talk about. And each of those 4 major differences is a large chapter. So the first, I just go through very quickly because I want to hear other people's comments. The first difference is the historicity, the emphasis given to historicity in the West, what I call history centrism in the West, is explained, and how this is different from the embodied knowing or Adhyatma Vidya in the Indian tradition, and why they are different, why the history centrism is undermined if you have a whole lot of Adhyatma Vidya, because you no longer need that radical absolute historicity. So this tension between history centrism of the West and Adhyatmic approach, the idea that the human is Satchitanand, does not need a historical intermediary but can himself be evolved. This is a very different approach. Then the second difference is what I call integral unity of the Indian system versus what I call synthetic unity of the West. And I explain integral unity as sort of where the unity pre-exists, the one pre-exists, and the multiplicity emerges, but the multiplicity is not really self-sustaining. It is not the real essence of multiplicity. The separateness is apparent and relative to the oneness. And this idea I can even convince to the dualists, even the Vishishtadvaitins, Buddhists also. Yes, in one approach Brahman, but Buddhists more like Brahman, they do accept that separate essences do not exist. Separate things do not have real existence. So, on the other hand, in the Western thought, Aristotle brought about a very clear idea of multiple essences and the law of the excluded middle, which is a very important and powerful philosophical concept for them. And also in Judeo Christianity, the separation of man and God and world and so on is a very strongly entrenched thing. So I explained the significance, philosophical and metaphysical significance of integral unity of one system and synthetic unity of the other system. The third difference is what I call order and chaos. The way Indians process what the Westerners call chaos is quite different. And in Banaras you can see what Westerners would consider chaos. So this idea became apparent to me during the Kumbh Mela. I was in the Kumbh Mela, and the Juna Akhada, which has few lakh sadhus, Naga sadhus in it, they invited me to be their guest. So I went and did my Shnan with the Nagas. It was quite a marvelous experience. And then when I was ready to go, my taxi was waiting after I had stayed there for several days, and I was to come back to Delhi. I just went and did my namaskar to the host, the head of the Juna Akhada. And there was a TV crew from the United States, ABC News. There's a show called Sunday Morning Show. And they had spent 1 month in the Kumbh Mela to do a documentary. And so this person who was the head of the Juna Akhada was being interviewed. They had gone around to a lot of people asking them for information and perspectives on Kumbh Mela. So he said to them, why don't you ask Rajiv, he may have something interesting to say. Rajiv, why don't you spend a few minutes with them? So I decided to get interviewed. And they told me it takes only 5 minutes. We just want to ask everybody the same question and then we'll make our documentary. We've been going around asking hundreds of people. So I said, fine. And this, what was supposed to be 5 minutes ended up taking 3 hours because they were very fascinated by the way I was explaining. And then when the final documentary appeared, it was mostly my discussion that appeared. Of course, some of the more controversial things I said they cut off, So what happened is they asked me the question, which they have been asking everybody. How do we go back and explain to the American viewers what is the meaning of all this chaos? That's the question. What is all this chaos? So I said that basically the chaos is in your mind, is in the viewer's mind. It's in your mind because you have cognitive overload. Your cognitive system can handle up to a certain amount of complexity. And this is more complex than you're used to. You're used to simple things, like God gave you 10 commandments. 10 commandments, you cannot even run your ABC rules documentary, you have a lot of rules. So the principles by which you govern yourself are far more complex than some simple things. And here you have so many things happening, so much sensory overload, so many things happening in parallel, so much ambiguity, uncertainty, doubt. Things are not following a predictable pattern. You're used to a predictable pattern. You are expecting something that's normal to you. And so here, the level of complexity is far greater than what you can handle. Your cognitive system is crashing. And when your cognitive system crashes with more of complexity than you are able to deal with, then that feeling of cognitive crash is what you're calling chaos. So chaos is just in you because your system is not used to this. So I said if you go around asking any one person, just look at one person, what he's doing, somebody's walking this way, somebody's taking a bath, somebody's eating something, whatever everybody's doing, they're not feeling that they're in chaos. They're just doing their thing. And others are doing their thing. So this is, actually if you look at it, Indians have one of the differences between Indians and Americans in my corporate life was this observation about Indians' ability to multitask, deal with a lot of parallel information. When you are at a counter, whether it's a post office, whether it's a chaiwala, he is processing many transactions, many clients at the same time. He's taking this guy's money and giving that guy chai and then this guy's money. And when I went to the United States, if you try to do that, they feel that you are rude. You're uncivilized, you stand in line, wait for your turn. Whereas here, if you stand in line, wait for your turn, you never get your turn. So there's a different skill. It's a skill to handle. Now, when I had project meetings in my corporate life, sometimes I would have Indians and Americans all involved in the project. So Indians are all having many conversations with each other. So A is talking to B and C is talking to D and E is talking to 3 of them together and so on. And the Americans just sort of very dazed, like quiet. They just sort of stay quiet because they're not just jumping in and participating in this. So when the meeting would be over, the Indians knew, okay, what the decision is, what they're supposed to do, and they'll go back and be happy. The American Westerners would come to me and say, sir, we don't know what happened, what is decided, I have no clue what was going on. Everybody is talking about all these things, are we to do this, are we to do that. So the Indians had sort of filtered out the multiprocessing and taken this so-called chaotic input and experience and turned it into what I'm supposed to do, that kind of thing. And for the Westerners, I had to go through the whole process again for their benefit and make it linear, 1, 2, 3, do this, do that, then we do this, you do that, 1, 2, 3, like that. And then I decided that whenever I run my meetings, I will, now it's my fault. But sometimes this multiprocessing is not good. Yes. Which also, being comfortable with chaos and sort of putting up with it can also be a problem. And being orderly can also have its advantages in certain cases. So I'm actually showing the need for balance. But you know, I found that it was advantageous when you're having meetings to have a creative period and let all the brainstorming go on with all kinds of parallel things happening in an unstructured way. And then before closing the meeting, sit down and for the benefit particularly of those who have linear mind to write down very properly on the board, you know, this is what we decided. So that's probably a good balance between the two. But this whole chapter 4 talks about order and chaos as a principle in Indian thought where the two are balanced very deeply. The nature of reality, and chaos is not evil and is not something that you have to exterminate. Like in the Christian tradition, chaos is satanic and Eden is orderly. That's why when the Europeans came to Americas, they saw these natives as very chaotic people, and they said these are evil people, immoral people, because they lived in the jungle and so on. And I also write a speculative piece in this book that we are a forest civilization and the Abrahamic traditions are a desert civilization. So I have a chapter saying the forest versus the desert. And the complexity, I compare the complexity. And the desert, we see the forest very chaotic. Too much happening. So maybe the place of origin, maybe the geography had something to do also with this complexity issue between the two civilizations. The final difference that I talk about is that they call Sanskrit non-translatables, which means I talk about at least 20 words of Sanskrit which are commonly mistranslated and why these mistranslations create a problem. And my recommendation is that in the English language, these kind of words, maybe there's 50 or 100 important Sanskrit words which are philosophically very, very key, and we should just introduce them, make them part of the English language. Like we already have yoga, we can make many other words part of the English language rather than translating them, because when you translate, you lose context, you lose a whole lot of depth, and so that's what the book is about. And I'm grateful and thankful for all of you for your attention, and we look forward to some comments.
Thank you, Mr. Malhotra. We now know that this book is a product, it's an outcome of churning month, both external as well as internal. And when we talked about this process, how the Western culture, Western civilization has been cannibalizing other cultures, one of the interesting things about this process of cannibalizing is that even as you are appropriating, even as you are taking things from the cultures which you are going to digest and eat on, you also belittle that culture. This is one of the strategies which Western culture has always employed. While it appropriates good things, which it thinks are good things of that culture, it also belittles that culture. And in fact, difference or otherness always poses a kind of challenge which needs to be contained. And one of the strategies of containment of this difference is, or otherness is, by belittling something.